Yes, indeed, I would like to tackle the topic of standardization for M2M communication on a quite abstract level, but also drilling down to some of the examples that we might have. I've organized my talk into 4 chapters. The first one is very simple. Why do we need standardizations? That's quite obvious, I believe. Nevertheless, there are a few aspects. How is the situation of M2M standardization of today? Especially for the last 2-3 years, we have seen some relatively new and dynamic developments. And then I'll try to make an outlook into the future. Why do we need standardization? Whenever we communicate, well, we have to talk the same language. That's obvious. However, if we talk about same languages, we have to differentiate on which level we talk. When we look at the slides from telecom, we have end-to-end connectivity on a network level. That means devices can communicate on a physical level, but they don't necessarily understand each other, which is the aspect of the end-to-end application layer and the end-to-end application profiles. What does it mean if the one machine sends a 5? What does it mean to the other side? And even worse and even more difficult is the provisioning of end-to-end security, because it also includes the integrated management capabilities. So obviously, we need this interoperability, also from the technical point of view, but also from the market point of view, I believe, because long-term investments need to be vendor independent. And if we have too many different systems, and I believe that many of the examples of smart home, smart city demo installations show this very nicely, that you end up with tons of gateways between the different systems. And a seamless management of all the systems is a real hurdle and cost driver. Sorry for 2 German slides, but these are German studies, in this case from the German VDE, asking what are the biggest barriers with regard to the propagation of Industry 4.0 in Germany. And the number 1 and number 2 aspects which were named here are security and missing norms and standards. Basically, what we already heard from Mr. Machnik about his feedback from the companies he has been talking to. And to just let you know, when we discussed about my talk today, we just had a longer discussion if I should talk about the security issue or the standardization issue. So we decided for the standardization issue. Nevertheless, security is a major driver here as well. This goes for Industry 4.0, but we basically see the same picture for a completely different market segment. This is a study from Professor Böcke, who has been member of the M2M Alliance board until March of this year, and he has been asking customers for smart home equipment what they think is most important for their decision to buy equipment for home automation. And what we see here is standardization certification is number 1 and security is number 2. So basically the same answers, but from a completely different market segment. So obviously we need standardization on the different levels. But if we look around, we see very many activities. There are thousands of standard development organizations worldwide. More than 200 of them are developing standards for ICT. And of course, many of them are also now in the field of M2M and IoT standardization. In some cases, I very much believe that we can have an acceleration through diversity. However, this is real and woe. That means we are currently somehow driving into a situation where we have by far too many standards, and I'll try to show this with a few examples. If you just look to all those logos from the different fields, I think you already get an impression of what I mean. On the right side, we have the legacy field buses, where we maybe changed from 10 or 20, 30 different important different field buses to maybe now 5 to 7 industrial Ethernet field buses. But Ethernet industrial buses are again mostly physically driven. So let's look to the other ones where we are talking about application level standardization. And what we see here is that there is a large number of logos, and that these logos are sorted in different fields. That means we have organizations which are very much driven towards M2M industrial, or towards smart metering, or towards home automation. And I will come back to this issue later, because this, of course, will hinder the horizontal integration that we need to do in the next step. For the M2M field, that's certainly the ETSI. We see ETSI M2M specification. That's OMA driven from the mobile communication and device manufacturer side. That's MQTT and MQTT-SN sensor networks being invented from IBM, having a very nice publish-subscriber paradigm. Nest. We already heard about Industrial Internet Consortium in the talk from Mr. Machnik, and I will come back to the IIC in my last slide, because M2M Alliance has just become member of the IIC. Tomorrow we'll have a presentation from OPC UA, and there are a few more, FDT, OSGI, IPSO Alliance, and if you want to prepare your application to be compatible to something, it's easy. You can select one of those standards. But if you want to have an integrated system being open to different kinds of applications, then you, in the end, start making an additional middleware, a super layer integrating all the different data models into an additional data model. Same holds true basically for smart metering. However, that's a very niche, narrow market, not niche market because numbers are big, but very specialized market. But also here we see a good number of players and standards which are competing in the different regions of the world. That's Zigbee, mostly for the US and UK. That's OMS, Open Metering System, for Central Europe or Continental Europe and Asia. But what we see here also is that Europe is Europe, and not all countries just follow the OMS standard, but have a French dialect, have an Italian dialect, have a Spanish dialect, so that systems are not interoperable and become larger and more expensive. The world is by far more complex for the home automation field. You see a good number of logos here. That's just a selection. We had the nice task of making a standards overview for a large manufacturer of HVAC equipment for the last 2 or 3 months. And we had to look at about 35 different alliances and standards just for the HVAC communication in the field of home and building automation. A document with 150 pages, very complex, because the positioning of all these activities are very different. We tried to structure this analysis and found multiple dimensions where these standards are developed. Originally, standards have been developed by public bodies, state organizations, or generic engineering associations. That's associations like ETSI, like the VDE, like IEEE, and so on. Public or semi-public bodies. What we are seeing for the last years is that the significance of these public bodies has diminished dramatically, and that most of the recent activities come from industry sector alliances or consortia, where industry joins together possibly with research and make independent standards and standardization processes and certification processes, which makes the development more diverse. However, not everything is bad, of course. Around these alliances and consortia, in many cases, we see very interesting and active ecosystems which show the large power of open communities as well. However, this process is not structured in a very reasonable way, so that in the end we have a non-orthogonal system where some of the standards are very much device-oriented. Device-oriented standards are something like the ZigBee or the Z-Wave standard, where the node itself, the sensor or actuator node, is described. Other standards go much more into the direction of frameworks. This might be software frameworks like the Eclipse IoT, who has a booth outside, but this also might be device frameworks which are available. And if you move up through the layers from the device, the next level, of course, is the gateway. And there are also standards and approaches to tackle the harmonization from the gateway side. And having meta databases in the gateway itself. Or to move this into the cloud side and harmonize the systems from the back-end side. Next point, communication layer orientation, where we are mostly talking about the physical and network layer communication and interoperability, whereas in other standards, the application profiles are much more important. Many of the activities are driven from single vendors. Even though they call themselves alliances, there is one major player behind. This can be on the device level, like with the InOcean Alliance or the Z-Wave Alliance, but this also can be around Amazon or Google, or Somfy, where there's one major player behind trying to drive the development. As I said, regional characteristics still play a major role. This can be the different continents, but this can also be the different countries, especially in Europe, where there are different dialects or different directions. Some of the activities are very well structured and very well organized alliances. Others are quite open communities. Some have open standards in terms of open source or open documentation. Others are closed, where you just need to become member, sometimes paying significant fees to become member of the alliance, or it's even completely closed. You know, if you want to get the standards from the Amazon activities, it will be quite hard to get them. And above all, we also have the different generations of the standards. Whenever you look into the single boxes, you see several generations. For the smart metering, you name it OMS version 1, 2, 3, 4. It's ZigBee version 1.0, 1.1, 2.0, 3.0, and so on. And in many cases, these generations are not interoperable between each other. So, quite complex situation. How to deal with this? before I try to answer this question, let me also show this picture here, where we believe that there are somehow 3 waves of developments or generations that we might see. This is again for the home automation field, but can also be taken for other industry fields as well. There's been a first generation in this case in the end of the 90s or beginning of the 2000s, where alliances like Zigbee, Z-Wave, and Ocean, KNX have been founded. There was a large enthusiasm at this time. Then there was a second wave, which is quite distributed, not so high, so not a real wave, where for the last 10 years, several other players came up. And now for the third generation, this is a really active high wave, which started, I believe, something like 2-3 years ago, where we see a lot of players jumping into the market and defining their own approaches. All of them, or most of them, not being interoperable. Some of them use IP, especially IPv6 for the local communication as well, but are completely non-interoperable on the application layer. So we see an increasing number of alliances, consortia, ecosystems, as you have seen. Many of these alliances, by the way, do collaborate, have MOUs, have joint work groups, which makes the picture even, which adds one more dimension to this picture. However, we see a less and less structured process, rapidly increasing complexity. So the funnel currently is very much open, and what we need to have, in my understanding, is to close this funnel again and to reduce the number of approaches. The picture becomes more complex if we add interoperability on the horizontal layer. Currently, most of these activities that we have just discussed are thinking about vertical integration. Communication for one discipline that is, well, this might be traffic automation, this might be home automation, industrial automation, whatsoever. But if we look into the future and look into the next 1 or 2 decades and into the dreams of smart city, then we also need the integration of the different disciplines. Then electric cars need to be connected to the smart grid. Then home automation and telehealth, telecare need to be integrated. So we need this horizontal integration. So we have to move from spaghetti to lasagna in this picture. And this will keep us busy, I believe, for the next decades to really get to this picture. So I hope that in my talk it became clear that standardization is and remains a major issue. We see many alternative and overlapping solutions, both in research, that's normal, that the researchers at the universities like us do a lot of new things and try them out. But unfortunately, we also see them in real life and in real products, both in the big and in the small picture. And as I already mentioned, and as a member of the board of the M2M Alliance, this is the advertisement slide, so to say. The M2M Alliance is striving to help members and partners with information, but not only that, but also with active collaboration and contributions. As I mentioned, we joined IIC, Industrial Internet Consortium, in March this year, and are currently setting up a work group to get connected to this discussion stream, which might be very important, not only for the US, but also for the European markets. Yeah, thank you very much for listening, for being here at the summit, and thank you for shaping the future. Maybe, if I don't know, if you have some questions, we might ask them now. Otherwise, I think we are now going into the panel discussion. Thank you.
Professor Sikora, I've got a question of my own. You mentioned the devices and the infrastructure separately. Are the device ecosystems in M2M and the network ecosystems developing in any kind of synchrony? Or are these developments happening completely separately, and then we end up with another problem later on when we try and bring it all together?
The world is never black and white, I would say. So in my opinion, it's something in between. So it's not really synchronized because there are different alliances, there are different drivers behind. But of course, there is a lot of interdependence.
So there's sort of cross-fertilization of people and ideas.
Yeah.
It's always struck me that the alliances tend to follow an industry rather than following a need, a consumer need or an end-user corporate need.
I don't agree on this, maybe. I mean, alliances are driven by industry, so by the members. So whoever is a member in an alliance can drive this, and it's mostly industry. If you want to sell your products, you have to follow also the need. Unfortunately, for example, for the home automation market, this is a good example where the need seems to be different from the market offer, so that this market does not really develop as fast as it could be.
So in what ways might they differ? Sort of some people are more interested in security and others in home automation and some in home entertainment. Is that the sort of thing?
This might be one point, but I think this study from Professor Böcker showed this nicely. If you don't have a standard, you will be careful to buy something. I always explain this with my example. If I buy a home automation system at home, the worst thing which can happen to me is that I have to go to my wife 5 years later and have to say, well, we have to change the system because I bought the wrong one. So I'm careful. And I'm not the only one who's careful.
No.